The sound of desperate, muffled screaming pierced the dawn air as Isaac Stone pushed his horse harder across the Wyoming plains, following a trail most men would have abandoned hours ago. The year was 1878, and the wilderness surrounding Sheridan, Wyoming held no mercy for the weak or the lost. Isaac tightened his grip on the reins as the first orange streaks of sunlight illuminated what appeared to be a small encampment nestled between a rocky outcrop and a stand of cottonwood trees. His breath caught in his throat when he spotted movement: 3 men loading supplies onto horses, and something else. A woman bound to a tree, her dress torn and dirty, her head hanging limply forward. He dismounted silently, tethering his horse to a scrub brush before drawing his Colt revolver. Isaac had been tracking these men for 2 days after hearing rumors of a stagecoach robbery and a missing passenger. The local sheriff had been too drunk to organize a proper search party, and Isaac couldn't abide the thought of leaving anyone to such a fate. Moving like a shadow, Isaac positioned himself behind a boulder, taking careful stock of his odds. 3 against 1 wasn't favorable, but surprise was on his side. The woman at the tree shifted slightly, confirming she was still alive. That decided it. He couldn't wait any longer. His first shot caught the largest of the bandits square in the chest. The man dropped without a sound. The second bandit managed to draw his gun, but Isaac's next bullet found its mark before he could fire. The third man, younger and quicker than the others, dove behind their supplies, returning fire with impressive accuracy. A bullet grazed Isaac's shoulder, the hot sting of torn flesh causing him to grit his teeth. He rolled to a new position, waited for the briefest pause in gunfire, then rose and fired twice more. The camp fell silent except for the panicked whinnying of the bandits' horses. Isaac approached cautiously, gun still raised, making sure all 3 men were incapacitated. Satisfied they posed no further threat, he holstered his weapon and moved swiftly to the woman. Up close, he could see the raw, angry marks where the rope had cut into her wrists. Her head remained bowed, but as his shadow fell across her, she tensed, trying to shrink away. "It's all right, madam," Isaac said softly, keeping his voice gentle despite the adrenaline still coursing through him. "I'm not going to hurt you." Her breathing quickened, but she didn't look up. Dried blood matted her hair on one side, and dust covered her once fine traveling clothes. "I'm going to cut you loose now," he continued, drawing a knife from his belt. "Hold still." Isaac worked carefully, slicing through the ropes that bound her to the tree without touching her bruised skin. As the final strand gave way, she slumped forward. He caught her, supporting her weight as she found her footing. "My name is Isaac Stone," he said. "I'm taking you back to Sheridan." For the first time, she raised her head, and Isaac found himself looking into the most striking pair of green eyes he'd ever seen, filled with a mixture of fear, exhaustion, and the faintest glimmer of hope. Despite the dirt and blood on her face, he could see she was beautiful. "Katherine," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Katherine Greene." Katherine's legs gave way as she tried to stand on her own, and Isaac caught her again, this time sweeping her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and he could feel her trembling. "When did you last eat or drink, Miss Greene?" he asked, carrying her to his horse. "I don't remember," she managed. 2 days, maybe." Isaac set her down carefully on a flat rock and retrieved his canteen. "Small sips," he instructed, holding it to her lips. "Too much too fast will make you sick." She obeyed, drinking sparingly before pushing the canteen away. "Thank you," she said, her voice slightly stronger now. Isaac nodded and looked back at the bandits' camp. "We should take their supplies, and their horses." He paused. "Can you stay upright for a moment while I gather what we need?" Katherine nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. Isaac worked quickly, collecting the bandits' weapons, ammunition, and food. He secured 2 of their horses, leaving the third for the surviving bandit who was unconscious but not fatally wounded. "That man," Katherine said suddenly. "He'll come after us." "Not with a bullet in his leg and 20 miles from the nearest town," Isaac replied, tying the bandit's horses to his own. "By the time he makes it anywhere, we'll be long gone." He helped Katherine mount his horse, then climbed up behind her. She was so weak she leaned back against his chest, and he could feel every labored breath she took. Isaac wrapped one arm around her waist to keep her secure, holding the reins with his other hand. "It's about 4 hours to Sheridan," he told her. "Try to rest if you can." As they rode, Katherine drifted in and out of consciousness. Each time she startled awake, she would tense before remembering she was safe. Isaac kept up a gentle stream of conversation whenever she was alert, telling her about Sheridan, his small ranch outside town, and his work breaking horses for the larger cattle operations. Katherine revealed little about herself beyond the fact that she had been traveling from Boston to meet her uncle in Cheyenne when the stagecoach was attacked. Her uncle, apparently a successful businessman with interests in the railroads, would surely be searching for her. "He's my only family," she said weakly as they crossed a shallow stream. "My parents died last year, influenza." "I'm sorry to hear that," Isaac replied. "Family's important." "You have family in Sheridan." Isaac was quiet for a moment. "Not anymore. My father died in the war. Mother passed 5 years back. I have a younger brother somewhere in California, but we haven't spoken in some time." "I'm sorry," Katherine echoed his words back to him. The sun was high overhead when they finally crested a hill, and the town of Sheridan came into view. It wasn't much a main street lined with wooden buildings, a church steeple, and scattered homes and businesses stretching into the surrounding grassland, but to Katherine, it looked like salvation. Isaac took her straight to Doc Wilson's office, a small whitewashed building near the edge of town. The elderly doctor took one look at Katherine and immediately ushered them inside. "What happened to this poor girl?" he demanded, helping Isaac get her to an examination table. "Stagecoach robbery," Isaac explained briefly. "She's been held captive for at least 2 days. Dehydrated, probably hasn't eaten." Dr. Wilson nodded grimly. "I'll need to examine her properly." He looked pointedly at Isaac. "Alone?" Isaac nodded and turned to leave, but Katherine's hand shot out, grabbing his wrist with surprising strength. "Please," she whispered, fear returning to her eyes. "Don't leave." "I'll be right outside," Isaac promised. "Dr. Wilson will take good care of you. I need to inform the sheriff about what happened." She reluctantly released him, and Isaac stepped outside, closing the door behind him. He leaned against the wall of the doctor's office, suddenly aware of his own exhaustion. The graze on his shoulder had stopped bleeding but throbbed painfully. Sheriff Taylor was exactly where Isaac expected to find him, in the saloon, nursing a whiskey despite the early hour. The aging lawman had once been respected, but years of drink and disappointment had worn him down. He listened to Isaac's account with minimal interest. "So you shot 2 men dead and left another wounded in the wilderness," Taylor summarized, swirling his drink. "Over a woman you don't even know." Isaac's jaw tightened. They were outlaws who robbed a stagecoach and kidnapped a passenger. They'd have killed her once they were done with her. The sheriff sighed heavily. "I'll send a telegram to the Cheyenne authorities about the missing passenger. What's the lady's name again?" "Katherine Greene. She says her uncle is some kind of railroad businessman in Cheyenne." Taylor raised an eyebrow. "Greene, not Edward Greene's niece," Isaac shrugged. "She didn't mention her uncle's first name. If it's Edward Greene, she's not just some businessman's niece. Man practically owns half the territory's rail lines." Taylor took another drink. "I'll send that telegram right away." By the time Isaac returned to the doctor's office, Katherine had been cleaned up, her wounds treated and bandaged. Dr. Wilson met him outside. "She'll recover physically," the doctor said quietly. "The bruising on her wrists is severe but no permanent damage. The head wound is superficial. She's suffering from exposure, dehydration, and exhaustion." He hesitated. "There are also other bruises. She wouldn't speak of them, but I believe she fought her captors fiercely." A wave of cold fury washed over Isaac. "Did they know?" Dr. Wilson cut him off. "At least she says not. She was fortunate you found her when you did." He patted Isaac's arm. "She's asking for you. I've given her something to help her sleep, but she's fighting it. Says she needs to talk to you first." Isaac found Katherine sitting up on the examination table, wearing a clean dress that must have belonged to the doctor's wife. Her dark hair had been brushed and plaited, highlighting the paleness of her face. The bruises on her wrist stood out starkly against her skin, but her eyes were clearer now. "Mr. Stone," she said as he entered, "the doctor says I have you to thank for my life." Isaac removed his hat, suddenly uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. "But they didn't," she countered. "You did." Her eyes began to droop from the medicine. "My uncle will reward you handsomely. He's a wealthy man." "I don't want a reward, Miss Greene," Isaac said softly. She studied him for a moment, fighting to stay awake. "Then what do you want?" "Nothing. Just knowing you're safe is enough." Katherine smiled faintly before her eyes closed completely. "I don't believe you," she murmured as sleep claimed her. "Everyone wants something." Isaac stayed until he was sure she was sleeping soundly, then quietly left. Dr. Wilson assured him Katherine would remain under his care until arrangements could be made for her return to Cheyenne. 2 days later, a telegram arrived from Edward Greene, confirming that Katherine was indeed his niece and expressing his immense gratitude for her rescue. He was sending his personal physician and a security detail to escort her safely to Cheyenne, where she would recuperate in his home. Isaac kept his distance during those 2 days, though he found himself thinking about Katherine more often than he cared to admit. There was something about her strength beneath her vulnerability that had impressed him. The morning Katherine's uncle's men were due to arrive, Isaac rode into town with the intention of saying goodbye. He found her sitting on the porch of Dr. Wilson's house, color returned to her cheeks and a book open in her lap. She looked up as he approached, and a smile brightened her face. "Mr. Stone," she greeted him, closing her book, "I was hoping to see you before I left." Isaac removed his hat as he climbed the steps. "How are you feeling, Miss Greene?" "Much better, thank you." She gestured to the chair beside her. "Please join me." He sat down, placing his hat on his knee. "I hear your uncle is sending men to take you to Cheyenne." "Yes, they should arrive by noon." She looked down at her wrists, where the bruises had begun to fade to a mottled yellow. "I wanted to thank you properly, Doctor. Wilson says I likely wouldn't have survived another day out there." "I'm just glad I found you in time," Isaac replied honestly. Katherine studied him for a moment. "May I ask why you were searching for me? The sheriff didn't seem particularly concerned about my disappearance." Isaac shifted uncomfortably. "I heard about the stagecoach robbery when I was delivering horses to a ranch south of here. The driver was killed, but a passenger had been taken. Nobody seemed to be doing anything about it, so." He trailed off with a shrug. "So you took it upon yourself to find a complete stranger," she finished for him, "even though it could have cost you your life." "It was the right thing to do," Katherine smiled. "My uncle says the same thing, but in my experience, most people don't actually do what's right when it's inconvenient or dangerous." She reached out and touched his hand lightly. "Thank you, Mr. Stone. Truly." The touch of her fingers on his sent an unexpected warmth through Isaac's chest. He cleared his throat, suddenly finding it difficult to maintain his composure. "You're welcome, Miss Greene." They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Katherine spoke again. "Tell me about your life here in Sheridan. What's it like breaking wild horses?" The conversation flowed easily after that. Isaac told her about his small ranch, the challenges and rewards of his work, and life in the Wyoming territory. Katherine shared stories of Boston, her education, and her plans to eventually open a school for girls. "My uncle thinks it's a frivolous dream," she admitted. "He wants me to marry well and settle into society life, but I've always wanted more than that." "You don't strike me as the type of woman who gives up on her dreams," Isaac said with a smile. "No," she agreed, returning his smile. "I'm not." The sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. A group of well-dressed men on fine horses rode down the main street, led by a distinguished-looking gentleman in a black coat. Katherine's expression tightened slightly. "My uncle's men," she explained, rising to her feet. "They're earlier than expected." Isaac stood as well, suddenly aware that their time together was coming to an end. "Then I suppose this is goodbye, Miss Greene." Katherine looked up at him, something unreadable in her eyes. "Perhaps not forever, Mr. Stone." She hesitated, then added, "I'd like to write to you if you wouldn't mind. My recovery in Cheyenne is likely to be terribly boring, and I've enjoyed our conversation." "I'd be honored," Isaac replied, surprised and pleased by her request. "Though I must warn you, I'm not much of a letter writer." "Then you can simply tell me more about your horses and Sheridan." She smiled again, and Isaac found himself wishing he could see that smile more often. The men had dismounted in front of the doctor's house. The leader approached, hat in hand. "Miss Greene, I'm Dr. Harmon, your uncle's physician. He sent us to bring you safely to Cheyenne." Katherine nodded. "Thank you, Dr. Harmon. This is Mr. Stone, the man who rescued me." Dr. Harmon extended his hand to Isaac. "Mr. Stone, your actions were nothing short of heroic. Mr. Greene wishes to express his deepest gratitude and has instructed me to offer you this." He produced an envelope from his coat pocket. Isaac didn't take it. "As I told Miss Greene, I don't want payment for doing what any decent man would do." The doctor looked surprised but returned the envelope to his pocket. "Very well. Miss Greene, are you ready to depart? Your uncle is most anxious to see you." Katherine nodded, then turned back to Isaac. "Goodbye, Mr. Stone. You'll hear from me soon." "Safe travels, Miss Greene," he replied, tipping his hat. He watched as they helped her into a small carriage that had been brought specifically for her comfort. Just before the door closed, Katherine looked back at him, and Isaac could have sworn he saw something like regret in her expression. As the carriage pulled away, Dr. Wilson came to stand beside him. "That's quite a woman," the doctor commented. "Don't often see that kind of spirit, especially after what she's been through." "No," Isaac agreed quietly. "You don't." The next few weeks passed slowly for Isaac. He returned to his normal routine, breaking horses, maintaining his small ranch, occasionally helping neighboring ranches with cattle, but his thoughts often strayed to Katherine. He told himself it was natural to wonder about someone he'd rescued from such dire circumstances, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. The first letter arrived 3 weeks after Katherine's departure. Isaac read it by lamplight in his modest cabin, smiling at her vivid descriptions of her uncle's palatial home in Cheyenne and the tedium of her recovery. "Uncle Edward hovers over me as though I might shatter at any moment," she wrote. "The physician he keeps on retainer examines me daily, and I am forbidden from so much as walking in the garden unescorted. I understand their concern, but I find myself missing the openness of the Wyoming plains I glimpsed during our ride to Sheridan. There was a freedom there, despite my circumstances, that I cannot find within these gilded walls." She went on to ask about his work, his horses, and life in Sheridan. The letter concluded with a request that he write back to save me from the monotony of endless tea with my uncle's business associates' wives. Isaac's response was shorter and less eloquent, but honest. He told her about a particularly stubborn Mustang he was training, the early summer weather, and recent developments in town. He made no mention of how often he thought of her, or how he sometimes found himself looking down the road toward Cheyenne. Their correspondence continued through the summer. Catherine's letters grew longer and more personal, revealing a sharp wit and intelligence that impressed Isaac. She told him of her ongoing negotiations with her uncle regarding her desire to establish a school, her frustration with the social expectations placed upon her as a woman of means, and her memories of her parents. In turn, Isaac shared more of himself than he had with anyone in years, stories of his childhood, his hopes for expanding his ranch, and his occasional loneliness. In early September, Katherine wrote that she was fully recovered and that her uncle had reluctantly agreed to let her travel to Denver to meet with educators about her school plans. "I find myself wondering," she wrote near the end of the letter, "if I might extend my journey to include a visit to Sheridan. I should very much like to see the town properly, not through eyes clouded by exhaustion and fear, and of course, to thank my rescuer in person once more." Isaac read that paragraph several times, his heart beating faster each time. He wrote back immediately, assuring her she would be welcome and offering his assistance in finding suitable accommodations in town. Catherine's reply came quickly, informing him that she would arrive by stagecoach on September 20th, staying at the Sheridan Hotel for 1 week before continuing to Denver. "I look forward to seeing Wyoming as it should be seen," she wrote, "with a clear mind and open eyes." Isaac spent the next 2 weeks in a state of anticipation he hadn't felt since boyhood. He worked longer hours to ensure he could take time away from his ranch during Catherine's visit, and even purchased a new shirt and had his good boots repaired in town. The day of her arrival, Isaac waited at the stagecoach station, hat in hand, feeling unaccountably nervous. When the coach finally appeared in a cloud of dust, he straightened his shoulders and tried to calm his racing pulse. Katherine was the second passenger to descend. She wore a simple but elegant blue traveling dress, and her dark hair was arranged neatly beneath a matching hat. She looked around until her gaze landed on Isaac, and her face broke into a radiant smile that made his breath catch. "Mr. Stone," she greeted him, extending her gloved hand. "How wonderful to see you again." "Miss Greene," he replied, taking her hand lightly, "welcome back to Sheridan." "Thank you." She glanced around at the growing town with interest. "It looks much more inviting than I remember," Isaac smiled. "Most things do when you're not half conscious." He offered his arm. "May I escort you to your hotel? I can come back for your luggage." "That would be lovely," Katherine said, placing her hand on his arm. As they walked through town, several people stopped to stare at the elegant young woman on Isaac's arm. Katherine either didn't notice or chose to ignore the attention, instead asking Isaac questions about the various buildings and businesses they passed. "The town has grown considerably in the past few years," he explained. "The railroad's coming through next year, which has everyone excited about the possibilities." "My uncle mentioned that," Katherine said. "He has investments in the line, I believe." At the hotel, Isaac helped Katherine check in and carried her luggage to her room. It was the best accommodation Sheridan could offer, though he suspected it was far less luxurious than what she was accustomed to in Boston or Cheyenne. "Would you care to join me for dinner this evening?" Katherine asked as they stood in the doorway of her room. I'd love to hear more about what you've been doing since we last met in person. I'd be honored, Isaac replied, though I should warn you I'm not dressed for fine dining. Katherine smiled. Neither is Sheridan from what I can see. 7 o'clock, I'll be here, he promised. That evening was the first of many they would spend together during Katherine's week in Sheridan. They dined at the hotel restaurant, walked along the main street in the cool evening air, and talked for hours about everything and nothing. On her second day, Isaac took Katherine on a tour of the surrounding countryside on horseback. She proved to be an excellent rider, having learned as a child on her family's estate outside Boston. "This is magnificent," she said as they paused on a ridge overlooking a vast expanse of golden prairie. "I've never seen such open space before." "It's why I stay," Isaac admitted. "Some find it lonely, but I find it peaceful." Katherine nodded thoughtfully. "I can understand that. There's a certain honesty to this landscape. It doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is." On the third day, Isaac showed Katherine his ranch. It was a modest operation, a small cabin, a barn, corrals for the horses he trained, and a few acres of grazing land, but he was proud of what he'd built with his own hands. "You've created something wonderful here," Katherine told him as they sat on his porch, drinking coffee. "Something real." Her words warmed him more than he could express. "It's not much compared to what you're used to." "Perhaps that's why I like it," she replied. "Everything I'm used to comes with expectations and obligations. This—" she gestured to the open land around them. "This feels like freedom." Each day, Isaac found himself more drawn to Katherine's intelligence, strength, and quiet dignity. He admired her determination to create a school despite societal expectations, and her genuine interest in the lives of the people she met in Sheridan. For her part, Katherine seemed to blossom away from the constraints of high society. She laughed more freely, spoke her mind without hesitation, and appeared genuinely happy in Isaac's company. On her fifth evening in town, they attended a small gathering at the home of Dr. Wilson and his wife. Several of Sheridan's more prominent citizens had been invited to meet the niece of Edward Greene, whose railroad investments would soon transform their town. "Miss Greene, I understand you have plans to establish a school," Mrs. Wilson asked as they enjoyed dessert in the parlor. "Yes," Katherine replied. "A school for girls, focusing on both traditional subjects and practical skills. I believe women deserve the same educational opportunities as men." "A noble sentiment," said Mr. Harrison, the town banker. "Though some might say a woman's proper education should prepare her for home and family, not business or academia." Isaac watched Katherine's face, expecting to see the flash of irritation such comments usually provoked in her letters. Instead, she smiled politely. "Interestingly, Mr. Harrison, the most successful home managers I know are those with the broadest education. A woman who understands mathematics can balance household accounts. One who knows science can better care for sick children. One who studies literature can teach her children to appreciate beauty and ideas." She took a sip of her tea. "Education doesn't make women less suited to home and family, it makes them more capable in all aspects of life." A silence followed her words, broken by Dr. Wilson's chuckle. "Well said, Miss Greene." Later, as Isaac walked Katherine back to her hotel, she sighed heavily. "I apologize if I embarrassed you. Sometimes I simply cannot help myself." "Embarrassed me?" Isaac laughed. "Katherine, you were magnificent. Harrison needed to hear that, and so did everyone else in that room." She looked up at him, surprised by his use of her first name. It had slipped out unintentionally, but Isaac didn't regret it. Something had changed between them, a shift so subtle he couldn't pinpoint when it had happened. "You're not like other men I've known, Isaac." she said softly, making his own name sound like something precious. Is that good or bad? He asked, stopping in the pool of light from a street lamp. Katherine studied his face, her green eyes reflecting the golden light. Very good, she whispered. They stood there for a moment, the night air humming with unspoken words. Isaac wanted nothing more than to kiss her, but he hesitated, aware of the vast differences in their backgrounds and circumstances. Katherine broke the tension with a gentle touch to his arm. Walk me the rest of the way. On her final day in Sheridan, they rode to a secluded spot by a creek where cottonwood trees provided dappled shade. Isaac had packed a simple picnic, and they sat on a blanket enjoying bread, cheese, and early autumn apples. I leave tomorrow, Katherine said, breaking a comfortable silence. I know. Isaac had been trying not to think about her departure. She picked up a small stone and tossed it into the creek. I've been thinking a great deal about my future lately. Your school, yes, but more than that. She turned to face him. When those men took me from the stagecoach, I thought I was going to die. I spent those days tied to that tree thinking about all the things I'd never done, all the dreams I'd deferred because they didn't fit with what was expected of me. She took a deep breath. And then you came. Isaac shook his head. Katherine, please let me finish. She reached out and took his hand. You saved my life, Isaac, but more than that, you showed me a different way to live. These past months, your letters have been my lifeline to a world where people value action over appearance, where integrity matters more than social standing. Isaac's heart hammered in his chest as he looked down at their joined hands. What are you saying? I'm saying that I don't want to return to the life my uncle has planned for me. I want to build something real like you have. My school, yes, but also. She faltered momentarily. I find myself reluctant to leave Sheridan, to leave you. Isaac looked up to meet her gaze, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. Katherine, I'm a horse trainer with a small ranch. I can't offer you the kind of life you deserve. You don't understand, she said, her voice filled with emotion. The life I deserve is one I choose for myself. One with purpose and meaning and… She hesitated, then added softly, love. The word hung between them, fragile and precious. Isaac reached up to touch her cheek, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. I never expected to find someone like you, he confessed. When I found you that day, I was just doing what needed to be done. I never imagined you would come to mean so much to me. And do I, she whispered. Mean something to you? In answer, Isaac leaned forward and kissed her. It was a tender kiss, reverent and questioning at first, then deepening as Katherine responded with unexpected passion. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. I love you, Isaac said simply. I think I've loved you since I first read your letters and saw the true strength of your spirit. Katherine's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. I love you too. It makes no logical sense we come from different worlds. We've known each other such a short time, but I cannot deny what I feel. Isaac took both her hands in his. Katherine, I won't ask you to give up your dreams for me. Your school, your independence, these things matter. She smiled through her tears. What if my dreams have changed? What if they now include a life here in Wyoming? I could establish my school in Sheridan. The town is growing. It will need education for its children. You'd stay, really stay. Isaac could hardly believe what he was hearing. If I'm welcome, she replied, suddenly uncertain. Katherine Greene, he said solemnly, nothing would make me happier than having you stay in Sheridan. With me. They spent the rest of the afternoon making plans, practical plans about where Katherine could establish her school, how she would explain her decision to her uncle, how they would navigate the inevitable obstacles. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, their conversation turned to more personal matters. "My uncle will be furious," Katherine admitted as they packed up their picnic. "He's invested a great deal in my future, and he had specific plans that did not include a horse trainer in Wyoming territory." "Will he try to force you to return?" She shook her head. "He can't force me. I'm of age and in possession of a modest inheritance from my parents. But he can make things difficult. He has considerable influence." "Are you prepared for that?" Isaac asked seriously. "For people to talk, for your uncle's disapproval, for a life that's harder than what you're used to." Katherine mounted her horse with practiced grace. "Isaac, I survived being kidnapped by outlaws and left to die in the wilderness. I think I can survive a few disapproving looks and some hard work." Her expression softened. "Besides, I won't be facing it alone, will I?" "Never," he promised. That evening, Katherine wrote a lengthy letter to her uncle, explaining her decision to remain in Sheridan. She told him of her plans to establish a school, her growing attachment to the town and its people, and most importantly, her feelings for Isaac. "I do not make this decision lightly," she wrote. "I know it will disappoint you, and for that, I am truly sorry. But I must follow the path that brings me fulfillment and happiness. I hope, in time, you will come to understand and support my choice." She asked Isaac to post the letter first thing in the morning, before her scheduled departure on the eastbound stage coach, a departure she would not be making. The next morning, Isaac arrived at the hotel to find Katherine waiting in the lobby, a single trunk beside her. "Are you certain about this?" he asked one last time. "It's not too late to change your mind." Katherine smiled up at him, more sure of herself than he had ever seen her. "The only thing I'm certain of is that I belong here, with you." He took her hand and kissed it. "Then let's go home." Instead of the stagecoach, they loaded Katherine's trunk onto Isaac's wagon and headed toward his ranch. As they left town, Katherine looked back once at the road that would have taken her east, then resolutely faced forward, toward her new future. The transition wasn't without challenges. Katherine's uncle sent increasingly urgent telegrams, first expressing concern, then disappointment, and finally anger. He dispatched associates to reason with his niece, but Katherine remained firm in her decision. Eventually, seeing her determination, Edward Greene reluctantly accepted her choice, though he made it clear he considered it a grave mistake. With a portion of her inheritance, Katherine purchased a small building on the edge of town that had once been a mercantile. With Isaac's help, and that of several townspeople who had warmed to the idea of a proper school, she transformed it into a bright, welcoming learning environment. The Sheridan School for Girls opened its doors in November 1878 with 15 students of varying ages. Katherine proved to be a natural teacher, and word of her school's quality quickly spread. By spring, she had 27 students and had hired a second teacher, a widow named Mrs. Thornton. Meanwhile, Isaac expanded his horse-breaking business, earning a reputation throughout the territory for his skill with even the most difficult animals. His methods, gentler than those employed by many trainers, caught the attention of a wealthy rancher from Montana who commissioned him to train a dozen prime horses. Katherine and Isaac were married on a perfect June day in 1879, in a ceremony performed by the local minister. Dr. and Mrs. Wilson hosted the reception in their garden, and it seemed the entire town turned out to celebrate. Even Sheriff Taylor, now sober for 6 months thanks partly to Katherine's influence, attended with a new deputy he'd finally hired. "You've changed this town," Isaac told his bride as they danced under lantern light. "You've changed me." Katherine laughed, her eyes sparkling with happiness. "We've changed each other, and we're just beginning." Edward Greene did not attend the wedding, but he sent a surprisingly generous gift, the deed to 50 acres adjoining Isaac's property, along with funds earmarked specifically for Katherine's school. "Perhaps he's coming around," Isaac suggested as they read the accompanying letter. "Perhaps," Katherine agreed, "or perhaps he's simply recognizing that I won't be swayed. Either way, I'm grateful." They established their home on Isaac's ranch, with Katherine riding into town each day to teach at her school. The arrangement suited them both. Isaac had the space he needed for his horses, and Katherine had her independence and purpose. As winter approached, Katherine discovered she was expecting their first child. The news brought them both joy and trepidation. "What if I'm not a good father?" Isaac worried one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting gently on Katherine's still flat stomach. "You will be," she assured him. "You're kind and patient and strong. Our child will be fortunate to have you." Katherine continued teaching until she could no longer hide her condition, then reluctantly stepped back, allowing Mrs. Thornton to take over her classes temporarily. She used the time to develop a more comprehensive curriculum and to write to educators in the East, gathering ideas for expanding the school's offerings. Their son, William Edward Stone, was born on a snowy night in April 1880. Dr. Wilson proclaimed him perfectly healthy, with his mother's eyes and his father's determined chin. Katherine recovered quickly from the birth, and within weeks was back to her usual activities, now with William often bundled against her chest in a sling. "He's going to grow up knowing both books and horses," she told Isaac as they watched their son sleep in the cradle Isaac had crafted. "The best of both our worlds." As Sheridan grew with the arrival of the railroad, so too did the Stone family and their various enterprises. Katherine's school expanded to include boys as well as girls, and eventually became Sheridan's official town school. Isaac's reputation as a horse trainer spread throughout the territory, allowing him to be selective about his clients and to command higher prices for his services. They faced hardships, of course harsh winters that threatened their livestock, economic downturns that affected school enrollment, occasional illness, and the normal challenges of marriage and parenthood. But through it all, they maintained the bond that had formed in those early letters and deepened during Katherine's fateful visit to Sheridan. Edward Greene finally visited his niece in the summer of 1881, arriving on the new railroad line in a private car. He came prepared to be disapproving, but found himself impressed by what Katherine and Isaac had built together. The school was thriving, Isaac's horse business was successful, and little William was clearly adored and well cared for. "You were right," he admitted grudgingly over dinner in their home. "This is where you belong." In 1883, Katherine gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth Rose Stone, completing their family. As the children grew, they embodied the blend of their parents' values, William showing Isaac's patience and Katherine's intellectual curiosity, Elizabeth displaying Katherine's determination and Isaac's gentle strength. 10 years after Katherine had been rescued from certain death, she and Isaac stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching their children play in the yard. "You ever regret it?" Isaac asked softly. "Choosing this life over what you might have had?" Katherine turned to look at her husband, the lines around his eyes deeper now, his hair beginning to show traces of gray at the temples. She reached up to touch his face, feeling the familiar texture of his skin beneath her fingers. "Not for a single moment," she replied. "You cut more than rope when you found me that day, Isaac. You freed my spirit too. You gave me the courage to choose my own path." Isaac covered her hand with his own. "You would have found that courage eventually with or without me." "Perhaps," she acknowledged. "But I'm grateful I didn't have to." She smiled up at him, the same smile that had captivated him all those years ago. "Besides, I think we make a rather good team, don't you?" Isaac pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "The best," he agreed. As the sun set over the Wyoming plains, casting long shadows across the land they both loved, Katherine and Isaac Stone stood together in the life they had built, a life neither could have imagined that fateful morning when a desperate woman with bruised wrists and a fading spirit had been gently cut free by a cowboy with a good heart. Their journey had begun with an act of courage and compassion, but it had grown into something far more profound. A love story written not in the grand parlors of Boston or the business offices of Cheyenne, but in the honest earth of Sheridan, Wyoming, where two people from different worlds had found their shared destiny under the vast western sky.